Well, hi, I'm Jay. Welcome to my channel. We're all just tourists, and I'm glad that you're here. I am new at this, and you can probably tell that I really have not, don't really know the best way to make this polished and to make this gorgeous as I'd like to have. But it is what it is, and I'm just dadgum glad to be here. I would hope that you will subscribe to the channel. It's important to me and what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give information from my body of knowledge. I'm an over 60-year-old man. I live in rural North Carolina now. I have traveled pretty much around the world. I've taught in almost every state and in several countries. And I was a therapist. I was owned a car dealership. I've owned 14 restaurants. I know a little bit, and I've experienced some things. I've been through cancer. I've had a couple of strokes, and I've been stabbed. I've been shot at. I was a police officer. I've got a lot of things going on in my life, and I think that there's got to be a way to be able to transfer this information. My child is 30 years old, and she knows as much about me as a 30-year-old wants to know right now. There's other things that she'll want to know that she doesn't know. Like there's things about my dad that I don't know. My dad wasn't a good man. If you've ever heard me talk about him, you realize I don't say bad things about him, but I do speak the truth, and I'll say he wasn't a good man at all. He was a guy who worked very hard, and he was pretty honest. But he was a really brutal man. He was a World War II vet, and he was a very brutal man. He was very literal. If he said, "I'm going to break your face," it didn't mean I'm going to hit you. What that meant was, I'm going to hit you until something on your face breaks. And that was just my dad. And I didn't realize that men could be another way. In fact, he passed away when I was 26, I think. And I never had a relationship with him. I mean, he was there in the house, and I knew who he was, and I was afraid about him and afraid of him for most of my life, because he was a really brutal guy, and he didn't believe in suffering fools, and he certainly didn't believe in sparing the rod when it came to raising kids. He'd get mad, and he would use whatever he had, his fist, a stick, a belt, whatever, to inflict his correction, is what he would call it, on me, the son. I was the only boy. And he gave me a beating, and not a whipping, not a spanking, but a beating. Every 10 days or so, a couple weeks maybe. And I did something that I shouldn't have done, and I did what kids do. And my dad was a brutal guy. The last beating was a kidney beating. He beat me with his fist so hard that I peed my pants. I was probably 13 years old. And I did some things that weren't right, but I didn't deserve to be brutalized like that. My mother, on the other hand, was she was a strict disciplinarian, and she spanked me. She didn't beat me, but depends on how you define it, but she spanked me every day of my life. I'm sure I needed it. I was probably in some ways a willful child and did things that she didn't like, and she was trying to beat the devil out of me. And well, as it turned out, there's some good things that I learned. One of the things I learned from my dad is that it's really hard for a man to intimidate me, because my dad was a very fierce man, and he was really intimidating, and you better not talk back. You better stand up and take your comeuppance, such as it is. So I know I can take a beating. I know I can take a hit. I know I can take punches, and it doesn't kill me, and I'm not intimidated by other men. Now, the good news about that is I've never I've never hit my child. I've never paddled her. We did some circuit interrupt things when she was younger. when she's 2 years old, I might pop her hand if she was touching things I asked her not to, if there's something that wasn't safe for her. So I did break the cycle of violence, of family violence, and it's pretty, it's a thing I'm really proud of. But I didn't hate my dad. My mother tried to get me to hate him. I didn't hate my dad. I don't know about your relationship with your pops, with your dad, but I know that there's other questions I would ask. As a man, I would ask him some questions. He never gave me any advice. He never talked to me. He never gave me any correction other than physical beating, except two exceptions. When I was 19 years old, I'd left home. I'd moved out of the house. I'd gone to college. I didn't do well my first time in college. I went to a very strict fundamentalist college and got tossed out of the school because I broke the rules. Again, all those corrections that I had growing up didn't actually take. I guess I still rebelled to the school. And as a result of that, I got tossed out of school. So I came back home and I was lost. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any directions. And I looked at joining the military. I had gone and talked to an Army recruiter, and I talked to a Navy recruiter and a Marine recruiter who wasn't there. But I talked to those guys in one particular area in the house, in this town that I grew up in. And I came home and said something to my mom about that I'd been to a recruiter, and she was all upset because she didn't want her son to join the military in some sort of rush. And she told my dad when he come home, and he looked at me, he said, "If you're going to join any of them, look at the Air Force, because they treat themselves better and they got better child." He'd never given me any piece of advice. He'd never told me any fatherly advice. He'd never told me anything about how I should be doing my life or shouldn't be doing my life. He never gave me any instructions at all. And so there I was, I think 19 years old. I got that piece of instruction, and so I went down to an Air Force recruiter. And I started a process and joined the Air Force based on what my dad said. It's a powerful thing that my dad had said. And because he never gave me any advice, when he gave me a piece of advice, I followed it. And pretty interesting. And it worked out. I mean, he was not communicative of his time, the way he was raised. You know, he did the best he could. He originally, before then, he'd taken me to college. I won a scholarship. I won an academic scholarship to go to college. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college, and most of us had just to finish high school was a big accomplishment because my parents, neither one of them finished college or high school. And so it was a big accomplishment to finish high school, and here I got this scholarship to go to university. And I'm at this university, my dad dropped me. It was a 7.5 hour drive to there. And he dropped me off at the dormitory, and he said, "Well, I love you, boy." And I thought, well, I've never heard that before. He's never told me he loved me. He never said it. There's no behaviors that he shared with that made me believe he loved me. And so it's kind of wild. And I thought, wow. And of course I didn't believe it, and I was processing it. And he actually, so let's go get some coffee. I don't drink coffee, but I'll go with him. Here I am, hours away from home in a new environment. So we went and I got a soda pop, and he got a coffee. And he drove me around in Chattanooga, Tennessee is where we were, at Tennessee Temple University. And he drove me around. We drove up to Lookout Mountain, and there were a lot of civil plaques about the civil battles that were in the area. And he knew a lot more about it than he did because he never shared with me, he never talked to me about anything. And so when he looked at something and he said something, I was like, where's this coming from? So here I am, 18 years old. And then, of course, a year later, after getting kicked out of that college, he said, the Air Force is a better choice than the Army. And it's true. If you're in the Army, God bless you. I have nothing against the Army, nothing against the Marine Corps or the Navy or Coasties, all my sister services. But I was glad that he did give me that advice, and I'm glad that I followed it. I did 10 years, 5 months, and 29 days in the U.S. Air Force. But who's counting? So anyway, I'm just rambling. Hopefully some of this will help. If you have your dad, talk to him. Ask him some questions. Know that he may not be a perfect person, but he does have something that you can learn from. Of course, as you know, your mileage may vary. I'll talk to you again.